Maybe next time don't park like you own the place." The voice exploded across the courtyard like a firecracker, loud, sharp, meant to humiliate. Not correct. In the quiet of an upscale gated community just outside Atlanta, those 8 words shattered the morning stillness. A gallon of red paint arced through the air, slamming into the side of a matte black Range Rover. The splash echoed off the stone walls like a slap. Paint dripped in long, sticky streaks down the passenger door. On the concrete, a boot stomped on a broken reserve sign, crushed like pride under a cheap heel. A man in cargo shorts and a beer-stained braved he stood panting. His chest puffed like he'd won something. In his fist, an empty paint can. In his eyes, contempt. Unchecked and ancient. His name, Trent Walker, 43, self-proclaimed whole watchdog. But to most in this neighborhood, just a nuisance with too much time and too little empathy. Across the courtyard, a woman stood silent. Black, mid-40s, quiet, dressed in a gray hoodie, black joggers, and sneakers with no logo. No makeup, no jewelry. Just presence, just power disguised as pause. She didn't scream, didn't run, didn't raise her phone. She looked at the dripping car, then at Trent. Then she asked one question. "Are you done?" Trent sneered. "Oh, I'm just getting started. You think you can just waltz in here with that car?" That attitude. This isn't some rental lot. This is a private neighborhood, and we don't tolerate trespassers. His voice was loud. On purpose. He wanted the neighbors to hear. And they did. Curtains shifted behind windows. Garage doors cracked open. A few phones already recording. But no one interfered. Not yet. The woman didn't blink. She turned, calm as a held breath, and walked toward the damaged vehicle. The red paint glistened like a wound in the morning sun. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small microfiber cloth, and began gently wiping the mirror, not to clean, to think. Trent stepped closer. "You know what this is. This is called consequences. Park like a con. Get treated like one." She looked up. "Is that what this is?" she asked, not angry, just studying him. Trent grinned. "Oh, come on. You don't really live here. This spot's reserved for residents. That's why I called security already." The woman nodded once. "Of course you did." Behind them, a boy in his teens stood at the edge of the sidewalk, phone in hand, recording quietly. His mother reached for his wrist, hesitated, then let go. Because something was happening here. Something they'd seen before and didn't want to see again. And then the boy whispered, "Mom, I think that's Malcolm Reeves." She turned to him, startled, from the articles. He nodded slowly. "Yeah. He's the guy who bought 3 buildings downtown last year. The one who..." Shh. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Malcolm Reeves, the man whose silence just unnerved an entire neighborhood. The thing about Malcolm Reeves, he never needed noise to take up space. He didn't wear tailored suits when off duty. He didn't drive flashy cars to make a point. And he never ever raised his voice just to be heard. That morning, he wore what he always did on Saturdays, a hoodie, joggers, and sneakers that hadn't seen a polish in months. No Rolex, no assistant, no briefcase. To the untrained eye, he was just another middle-aged black man with a nice car and a quiet posture. To the people who mattered, he was the man behind the scenes of 5 major tech mergers, 3 real estate blocks in Midtown, and the only black-owned firm listed on the Southern Private Equity Index. But none of that was written on his hoodie. He walked past the red paint on his Range Rover calm, like he was passing a puddle. Not a crime scene. The air smelled of sun-warmed stone and fresh injustice. But Malcolm had smelled it before. At 29, a valet once tossed his keys into the Uber bin and asked him to leave through the side entrance. At 35, a VC firm assumed he was the driver for his own pitch meeting. At 41, He got locked out of the rooftop lounge in a building he owned until his assistant showed up with paperwork. Today felt like all of them. Compressed. He crouched beside the car, not to inspect the damage but to see if Trent Walker had any idea what he'd just done. Trent stood on the curb, still puffed up, still certain. "You're lucky I didn't call the cops." He barked, "You people never learn." Malcolm looked up at him, slowly. "You're right," he said softly. "Some of us never do." Across the street, a woman in gym tights whispered to her husband, "Isn't that the guy who bought out Riverview Plaza?" He shrugged. "Doesn't look like it." Exactly. Because Malcolm didn't walk around looking like money. He walked around like time patient, relentless, and always on schedule. 3 doors down, Mrs. Lopez, retired school teacher, 70, to open her blinds. She'd seen Malcolm walking his dog every evening for months, always polite, always quiet. But now, she leaned forward. Something about this morning felt different. Malcolm stood, wiped his hands on a cloth, and looked at the ruined paint again, red on black. It looked like vandalism, but it felt like history, and the cameras were still rolling. The teenager from earlier adjusted his grip on the phone, whispering into the mic. "Okay, this is wild." The guy didn't even flinch. And this neighbor, still yelling, still throwing shade. His mother elbowed him. "Put that down." "I am," he said, but didn't. Malcolm turned and walked slowly back toward the sidewalk, not to confront, not to explain, just to be seen. And that's when Trent stepped forward again. "You think parking next to the management office makes you a resident?" "I checked. No unit here is registered under your name." Malcolm paused, turned his head slightly. "That's true," he said. "My name's not on a unit." Trent smirked. "Exactly." Malcolm nodded. "Because I own the entire block." Trent laughed full belly, sarcastic, mocking. "Oh, please. Come on. If that's true, why didn't you say something?" Malcolm looked him straight in the eyes. "Because I don't explain myself to people who think I don't belong." For a moment, just a flicker, Trent blinked, and that's when the phone buzzed in Malcolm's pocket. He answered with one word: "Go." Across town, in a quiet office, a woman named Dana began uploading one document after another into the building's whole dashboard. Property deeds, digital signatures, legal confirmations, protocol activation logs. The first file was titled Reeves Holdings, Master Ownership Agreement Estates at Greenview, 2022. But Trent wouldn't see that. Not yet. Because first, he'd have to understand what silence really sounds like. The first to arrive wasn't security. It was Tom from Unit 18C, gem shorts, Bluetooth earpiece, CrossFit aura. He jogged up the walkway like he owned the whole himself. His eyes flicked to the red paint on the car, then to Malcolm, then to Trent. "What's going on here?" he asked, already siding with the man in cargo shorts. "Bet your car." Malcolm didn't look up. He was wiping paint off the side mirror with measured strokes, like polishing a memory. Trent pointed, breathing fast, caught him parking in reserved again. Said he owns the block. Tom smirked. "Oh, really? That what we're doing now?" Malcolm stood. His hoodie was still spotless, his expression, same as always, a still lake hiding deep currents. Tom folded his arms. "Look, man, I'm on the board. You can't just walk around claiming ownership. This is a private property. We have protocols." Malcolm glanced at him. "Do those protocols include destruction of property?" Tom blinked. "Well, no. But then start there." Before Tom could respond, another voice cut in, nasal, sharp, authoritative. "Step away from the vehicle, sir." Security had arrived. Or more precisely, Steve, a part-time rent-a-cop in a faded Navy uniform who took himself a little too seriously. Steve stepped between Malcolm and the car like a referee breaking up a fight he didn't understand. He pulled out a tiny notepad like he was solving a murder. "What's the issue?" Trent stepped forward, puffing again. "Vandalism prevention. This guy doesn't live here. Keeps parking in reserved spots. I had to act." Malcolm turned to him slowly. "You threw paint on a car to prevent vandalism." Trent didn't flinch. I defended community standards. Tom chimed in. He's not on any resident list. Not on lease. Not on deed. We checked. Steve turned to Malcolm. Sir, I'm gonna need the CID, proof of residence. Lease agreement, if you got one. Malcolm didn't move, didn't blink. He just said, quiet but clear. No. Steve stiffened. Sir, if you don't comply, I'm not required to show proof to someone who hasn't even verified the claim being made. Tom stepped in again, louder now. Listen, I don't care who you think you are. This block is community owned. If you don't have a unit, you're trespassing. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. So it's community owned now? Tom nodded fast. Exactly. We have a board. We vote. We approve. Malcolm tilted his head. Then let's talk about the vote from November 12th. Tom's face froze. Malcolm continued. Slow and steady. The one where this community sold the entire block's management rights to a private equity firm. Trent glanced sideways. Wait, that deal went through? Malcolm nodded once, 18 months ago, quietly, legally, and fully ratified. Tom's voice cracked, trying to hold on to something. Well, who bought it? That's when Malcolm pulled out his phone. No theatrics, no grand gesture, just one tap. The large digital sign near the entrance gate normally showing time, weather, and a rotating banner about recycling days flickered, then changed. Big white letters on black background. This property is managed and owned by Reeves Holdings Group. Underneath, smaller text. Malcolm A. Reeves, managing partner. Silence. Even the wind paused. Steve lowered his notepad like it had betrayed him. Trent's lips parted, searching for a word that didn't exist. Tom stepped back, eyes darting toward the sign, then toward the crowd now forming behind the gates. Someone whispered, "No way." A woman's voice cut through the crowd, clear and stunned. He really does own the block. Malcolm didn't gloat, didn't move, just let the silence wrap around them like gravity. Steve cleared his throat, his voice much smaller now. I'll need to verify that. Malcolm nodded. Please do. I'll wait. And then, calmly, like it was a casual errand, he said into his phone, Dana, proceed with step 2. Visibility protocol. I want full transparency by end of day. The teenager with the phone whispered, he's not just calm. He's orchestrating. The mother didn't respond, because it was clear now. This wasn't about a car. It never was. Malcolm didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't look around to see who'd noticed, because he already knew everyone had. Steve, the security guard, stepped back slightly, pretending to read from his tablet. His hands shook, just a little. Tom crossed his arms tighter, like posture might cover shame. And Trent was staring at the sign. The bold white letters on black still hung above the gated entrance like a judgment rendered. Malcolm A. Reeves, managing partner. He blinked fast, like maybe, if he did it enough, the name would disappear. It didn't. Malcolm stepped away from the Range Rover, slow and centered, each movement deliberate. Not dramatic, not for show, just precise. He pulled out a pair of black gloves, not leather, not fancy, and slid them on with quiet resolve. Then he turned his back to the crowd and started cleaning. No one spoke, not because they were ordered, but because silence had become the only reasonable response to the weight in the air. Red paint had dried along the fender like blood after a battle. He wiped it off, stroke by stroke, like he'd done this before. Like it wasn't about the paint. Across the street, Mrs. Lopez clutched her mug a little tighter. She had once seen this man speak at the city council, sharp, deliberate, unsparing, and now here he was, wiping off someone else's ignorance without a single curse. That was power. Tom finally broke. So what? You own the block. That doesn't give you the right to humiliate people. Malcolm didn't turn around. I didn't humiliate anyone. Yeah. Trent snapped. Then what would you call this? Malcolm stood, faced them both. Response. He said quietly, not revenge. Tom scoffed. You let that sign go live just to make a point. Malcolm looked at him for a long moment. I let the truth do what it always does, surface. Steve spoke next, Voice small. Mr. Reeves, if I may, I didn't know. No one told me you were. You were doing your job, Malcolm interrupted, calm. You listened to the loudest voice in the room. That's common. He paused, but not commendable. The silence that followed didn't need a mic. It rang out across the bricks, between the windows, down into the phones that were still recording some openly, some from coat pockets. Trent was sweating now. The bravado had drained from his face. All that was left was the impulse to control what couldn't be walked back. He muttered, "You could have just said something. Could have cleared it up." Malcolm stepped closer. "Why should I have to?" he asked low, direct. "You vandalized my car, accused me of lying, mocked my presence." He nodded toward the paint still dripping down the side mirror. "And I still didn't yell. I didn't swing. I didn't threaten." He took a breath. "Because I've learned when people want to erase you, the worst thing you can do is react the way they expect." Another pause. "And the best thing you can do is keep cleaning." Malcolm turned back to the car, finished wiping the last corner. Then he tossed the cloth into a nearby bin, turned to Steve, and said, "I won't press charges. Not yet." Trent's head shot up. "But I will log everything. You threw paint on a vehicle owned by a company with federal protection. That puts you in another category." Steve opened his mouth, then shut it. Tom looked at Trent, suddenly unsure whose side he was supposed to be on. Malcolm glanced around, eyes sweeping across the gathering now grown to 15. Maybe 20 silent onlookers. Some were HOA members, some residents, a few delivery drivers, all bearing witness. To what? To something they couldn't unsee. Malcolm stepped forward one last time. To the boy still filming from the sidewalk. He looked him in the eyes. "You don't need to post that." The boy hesitated. "But people need to know." "They will," Malcolm said, "not through views, through action." The boy lowered the phone, then whispered, almost like an apology, "Sir, that was the calmest kind of power I've ever seen." Malcolm gave him the smallest nod. "That's because it wasn't power," he said. "It was restraint." The silence cracked. Not from Malcolm, not from Trent, but from the edge of the crowd. "I saw everything," a voice said. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. All heads turned. She stood next to the bike rack, petite, black hoodie, natural curls pulled into a puff. Her name was Jasmine Moore, 27, delivery driver, part-time student, full-time witness. "I was here when it started," she said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't provoke anyone. He parked. "That's it." Trent scoffed. "You don't live here." "No," Jasmine replied, "but I drive through here 5 days a week. I've delivered to your house. I've seen how you treat people who don't look like you." Trent stepped forward, chest out again. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," she said. Her voice didn't waver. Her phone was already recording, not secretly, but boldly. Raised chest level, camera pointed straight at Trent. Steve started to say something, but Jasmine spoke over him. "I wasn't going to get involved," she said. "I figured, another rich guy, another neighborhood spat. But then I saw the paint, the yelling, the sign, and the silence that followed." She looked directly at Malcolm. "You shouldn't have to carry this alone." Malcolm nodded once, a small acknowledgement, nothing more. And just like that, another voice joined. "Same," said a man from the far right of the crowd. "Andre, mid-30s, black beard, work boots." "I saw it too, from my balcony." He pointed up to Building 4A. "I heard what he said, about you people, about calling the cops, and I knew where this was headed." Trent's face was losing color now. His eyes darted from voice to voice. But they kept coming. A middle-aged white woman in a Patagonia vest spoke next. "Linda, you need 3C. I didn't want to assume anything, but now I feel ashamed. I saw Mr. Reeves walking his dog last week and thought he was new. I even asked him if he needed directions." She turned to him, flushed. "I didn't mean offense. I just didn't know." Malcolm gave her the same nod, calm, measured. "Not knowing," he said, "isn't the problem." He paused. "Assuming you do is." The crowd murmured, Not loud, but affirming. And then, from the back, a familiar voice returned the teenager with a phone. My video has over 8,000 views already, he said. Comments are blowing up. His mom looked at him. He held the phone low this time. Respectful. People are saying it's about time someone like him said something. Malcolm turned. I didn't say anything. The boy blinked. Malcolm continued. The truth said it for me. I just didn't interrupt. Another ripple of silence, but this one carried weight, respect. From near the entry gate, an elderly black man leaned on his cane. Mr. Howard, 72, lived in the community since the 90s. Son, he said to Malcolm, I've seen this game played for decades, but I've never seen an answer like that. He pointed at the sign above the gate. You didn't shout, didn't film, didn't warn. You just proved. That's a new kind of protest. Malcolm's expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders softened just a little. The crowd had shifted. What began as suspicion was now solidarity. Even Steve, the security guard, lowered his tablet and said quietly, Sir, I'd like to formally apologize. Malcolm turned. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to your training. It failed you. Steve nodded, swallowing hard. Tom, the HOA board member, stepped back into the group no longer centered. He raised a hand. Maybe we should discuss next steps. Malcolm looked at him, expression flat, unreadable. Then he said, You're late to the conversation. The steps have already begun. He pointed to the sky. A drone hovered silently above the crowd, red light blinking. Someone gasped, That's not news media. No, Malcolm replied. That's mine. He tapped his phone once. Beep. The drone adjusted position. Recording, logging, archiving. Because this moment wasn't just a one-off. It was a page in a system report, one of many. A story not of vengeance, but of verification. And justice. Justice had just walked in without a megaphone. The truth was already circling them. But Trent wasn't done. He stepped forward again, more desperate now than defiant, voice pitched high enough to cut the quiet. Don't you all see what's happening? He shouted. This isn't justice. It's theater. He's manipulating you. All of you. No one replied. So Trent pointed at the drone, hovering calmly overhead. Really? He scoffed. A drone. A preloaded sign. This was staged. Tom, still standing off to the side, nodded fast to fast. He's right, he added, scrambling to realign. This whole thing was calculated. A publicity stunt. Maybe to boost a company launch or some rebranding. He turned toward Malcolm, trying to find footing. You could have handled this in private, but you wanted attention. Malcolm's gaze didn't flicker. I wanted accountability. Trent laughed bitter, sharp. Accountability doesn't come with cameras. Malcolm stepped forward, just one pace. Enough. Funny, he said, because neither did your vandalism. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Steve looked away. Jasmine, the delivery driver, raised her phone again, but Malcolm held up a hand. No, he said gently. Let them finish their performance. Tom bristled. You're twisting this. You don't belong in this community, and you know it. You don't participate. You don't engage. You're not visible until things explode. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. You just described every system that protects people like you. The words hit harder than a yell, harder than paint, because they were true. Mr. Howard, still leaning on his cane, spoke next. Tom, when was the last time you showed up to a board meeting and didn't interrupt the women who spoke? Tom blinked. That's not the issue. It is, Linda added. It always has been. You just never noticed until someone quieter than you owned the place. Trent's face turned red. His fingers curled. Then came the final deflection. You know what? He spat. Fine. Maybe you own the property, but that doesn't change what this looks like. You walk around quiet, dressed down, playing innocent. That's not transparency. That's manipulation. Malcolm paused, then said, It's called dignity. Trent scoffed. No, it's calculated. Everything about you is curated. You show up when it's convenient. You disappear when you're questioned. That's not leadership. No, Malcolm replied, voice still even. It's protection. He stepped forward once more. You think it's a luxury to walk in silence, to wear plain clothes, to not prove yourself every time you breathe. But for people like me, that's defense. That's survival. He let the words hang. Don't confuse restraint with absence. I've been here the whole time. You just didn't want to see me. Tom opened his mouth and closed it. Because what do you say when the lie you've built is spoken aloud by its victim? Jasmine looked around at the crowd. He's not staging this. You are the ones making it a show. The teenager lifted his phone again, whispering into the mic. This isn't performance. This is what it looks like when the world finally turns on a script that never served us. Steve cleared his throat. Mr. Reeves, do you want us to call anyone? Malcolm shook his head. They're already listening. From his phone, a voice echoed out, calm, female, authoritative. Mr. Reeves, this is Dana. Phase 2 of visibility protocol is complete. HUA internal logs uploaded. Pain incident recorded. Security audio archived. Board records now available to public shareholders upon your approval. Malcolm said just one word, approved. Across the crowd, a few phones vibrated. Emails had gone out, documents attached, names visible. And just like that, the balance of control slipped. Not with shouting, not with violence, but with documentation. Tom looked down at his phone. Blink. What the hell is this? Malcolm answered without looking at him. It's the part of the story where receipts speak louder than reputations. The crowd stirred. Jasmine nodded slowly. It's Tom. And Trent? He had no words left. Only silence. The same silence he once used to erase others now folding back over him like consequence. Trent was unraveling. The calm of the crowd didn't soothe him, it agitated him. The more Malcolm stood still, the more the weight of his silence pressed down like judgment, like gravity. And some men, they can't survive gravity. You think that name protects you. Trent snapped, pacing now. You think a sign and a title and a few documents make you untouchable. No one answered, so he doubled down. People like you always think you're smarter than the system. You hide behind LLCs and tech shells and fancy terms. But take all that away. He paused. What's left? Malcolm didn't flinch. Trent's voice rose again. Without the name, you're just a black guy in a hoodie with a nice car and no answers. Still no response. Just the weight of truth standing calm in sneakers. So Trent moved. Fast, he marched to the Range Rover, reached for the driver's side door, and yanked. The handle clicked open. Gasps. Audible. Immediate. He leaned in, grabbed the glove compartment, ripped it open. What are you doing? Someone shouted. I'm exposing him. Trent barked. Let's see whose name is on this car. Let's see if he's even the owner. Steve. The security guard stepped forward. Sir, step away from the vehicle now. Trent ignored him, pulled out the car registration, waved it like a prize. Let's see who really owns this. He stopped mid-sentence, because the name at the top of the document wasn't some shell company. It wasn't buried in legal language. It was typed in bold. Malcolm A. Reeves, personal registration class 1 executive. Trent's hand shook. Steve reached forward. That's private property. You just committed a second offense. I was verifying. Trent yelled, spinning around. He could have forged this. You don't know. You forced entry. Steve interrupted, eyes hard now. That's trespass. Tom stepped back, visibly sweating. Jasmine raised her phone higher. This is going online, she said. You better believe that. Trent tossed the paper like it burned his fingers. It's all a setup, he shouted. None of this is real. That sign could have been photoshopped. That drone to me and hacked the system. No one moved. Then Mr. Howard, leaning heavy on his cane, stepped forward just one step, but it carried decades. You don't even believe yourself anymore, he said. Trent looked around, eyes wild, breath short. Then he reached back toward the car to slam the door maybe, or grab something else. But Steve stepped between them, one arm raised. Don't, he said sharply. You've done enough. Malcolm finally moved. He walked toward the open car door, took the registration back, folded it calmly, then turned to Trent. "You didn't just open a door," he said. "You opened a file." Trent sneered. "What does that mean?" "It means everything you did, every word, every grab, every insult is now logged, archived, and reportable." He nodded to the drone, to state, to federal, to corporate. "You can't do that," Trent stammered. "That's illegal surveillance." "It's my property," Malcolm said, "every inch including the airspace within HOA limits. And as of today, every camera here is under my authorization." Tom spoke up, desperate. "This doesn't have to go legal. We can mediate." Malcolm looked at him. "The time for mediation was before you let a man weaponize his fear into action." Another silence, then a small click. Dana's voice, crisp over speakerphone. "Mr. Reeves, Phase 3 active. Full incident file uploaded. Legal flagged it as escalated breach. Do you want to proceed with statement protocol?" Malcolm replied without hesitation. "Yes, let it run." The crowd tensed. Tom whispered, "What statement protocol?" Steve didn't answer, but Malcolm did. "It's when silence becomes law." He turned back to Trent. "You wanted to see what happens when my name doesn't protect me." Trent's lip curled. Malcolm stepped closer. "Now you'll see what happens when it does." Malcolm turned from Trent, walked back to the center of the courtyard, and stood beneath the digital sign bearing his name. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. With one tap on his phone, the screen above them flickered, the clean black and white title giving way to something new. A document, scrollable, line by line. Community Disruption Ledger, Greenview Estates. Date stamped entries. Incident logs. Redacted identifiers. Then the redactions vanished. Full names. Actions. Sanctions. Trent's name appeared first. Walker. Trent, unauthorized vandalism. Verbal harassment. Threat of force. Status, active review, legal phase initiated. Penalty, access revocation pending. The crowd gasped. Tom's name followed, though less severe. Ferguson, Thomas, negligence in board oversight, attempted obstruction of ownership records. Status, warning issued, board evaluation scheduled. "What the hell is this?" Tom barked, voice cracking. "You can't just..." "I can," Malcolm interrupted, "because it's protocol. Voted in by your board last fall. Clause 1-C. Emergency transparency rights." Tom blinked, silent. "We wrote the clause," Malcolm added. "You just never thought it'd apply to you." Steve, still beside the Range Rover, looked between them all. This is serious," he muttered. "This is systemic." Malcolm nodded once. "Exactly." He turned to the crowd. "For years, people like me have had to gather receipts quietly to prove what we already lived. Now we don't gather. We document, in real time, in full light." He tapped again. Another screen loaded, visible to all phones sent to the community app. HOA spending audit last 24 months. Bar graphs, line items, expenditures for security enhancements that never arrived. Payments to contractors with no work orders. Board stipends rerouted without approval. Tom paled. Jasmine read the screen aloud. $18,000 to a firm listed as Integrity Consulting. "That's your brother's LLC." Tom tried to speak. Failed. Tried again. "Those were approved expenses." "Not anymore," Malcolm said. "Reeves Holdings submitted forensic audit reports last month. We gave the board time to self-correct. They didn't." He paused. "And now, you're not just exposed, you're accountable." From her balcony, Mrs. Lopez clapped once. Firm, clear. Others followed. A ripple, not just applause, but recognition. For what? For the shift from the era of silent suffering to strategic sovereignty. Trent stumbled forward, sweat on his temples. "You think this makes you noble? You're just flexing money." "This isn't about money," Malcolm said. "This is about systems. You weaponize fear. I weaponize documentation." He looked Trent in the eye. "Guess which one lasts longer?" The drone hovered lower now, its lens shifting focus, capturing the board members, the guards, the crowd, everything. Dana's voice returned over the phone. "Final phase ready. All networked homes receiving community-wide transparency alert. Access cards of penalized residents scheduled for revocation at 4 p.m. Steve stepped forward, cautious. Sir, do you want me to escort Mr. Walker off the property? Malcolm didn't respond immediately. He turned to Trent not with vengeance, but with something colder. Clarity. You had the chance to learn quietly, he said. You chose to teach loudly. Now the lesson belongs to everyone. Then he nodded once to Steve. Escort him out. Trent's mouth opened, then closed. No one moved to stop it. No one offered a hand. No voice rose in defense. Because the verdict wasn't Malcolm's alone. It was collective and earned. As Steve walked Trent toward the gate, the drone followed quiet, floating, impartial. The same tool used to monitor packages now used to record power shifts. Jasmine whispered, he didn't just win. He redesigned the rules. Malcolm tucked his phone into his hoodie pocket. No smile, no celebration, just readiness. Because this wasn't the climax. It was the beginning of consequences. Trent was gone. Walked out through the front gate, flanked by Steve, watched by everyone, followed by silence. But Malcolm didn't watch him leave. He was already looking forward. Show the holdings file, he said, barely above a murmur. Another tap on his phone. The digital sign above the gate changed again, no longer black and white. Now, navy blue, the signature shade of Reeves Holdings Group. And then it appeared a slow-scrolling cascade of properties and assets. Greenview Estates full block ownership. Riverview Plaza 72% stake. Dunhill Towers 100% redevelopment rights. City Square Transit Corridor founding investor. Atlanta Urban Equity Council chair. 2023 present. Each line hit like a drumbeat. The crowd leaned in, phones raised. The teenage boy from earlier whispered into his live stream. Wait, this guy doesn't just own our block. He owns the blueprints of this city. Jasmine's eyes widened. He's the one who stopped the highway expansion project downtown. That wasn't the mayor. That was him. Malcolm didn't correct her. Didn't add anything? He didn't need to. Because the truth was doing what truth always does when unleashed it spread. Tom stepped forward, pale. Wait, you're the Malcolm Reeves? Malcolm glanced at him. That depends. Which one were you talking about before today? Tom stumbled. I didn't know. No. Malcolm cut in, calm but sharp. You didn't ask. Mr. Howard leaned on his cane, shaking his head slowly. The man who's been walking his dog at 6 o'clock sharp every morning is the same one. Who owns the East Beltline? Malcolm nodded once. Yes. And the funding for the minority-owned business district. And the broadband expansion in South Cobb. And the housing grant program that saved 3 blocks of single moms from eviction. He paused, and I did it all quietly. Because I believe people cared more about impact than identity. Jasmine exhaled. They didn't. Malcolm turned toward her, a trace of something in his voice, not anger, not regret. Resolve. They will now. Across the crowd, more names scrolled on the screen: subsidiaries, impact arms, investment branches. Reeves Holdings wasn't a real estate firm. It was a social architecture machine. And the man standing in front of them, he wasn't just the owner of the block. He was rewriting how blocks were built. How did we not know? Someone asked aloud. Malcolm heard it, let it sit, then said, because I never needed you to know. A pause. But I needed you to think, to see, to ask yourself why silence made you assume I didn't belong. He pointed to the paint-stained sidewalk. That stain will wash off. Then he pointed to the screen. But this is permanent. He tapped again. The screen faded to one message. This is what ownership looks like. Below it, Reeves Holdings building futures quietly. Phones filmed. Hearts shifted. And the courtyard, once a stage for accusation, had become a classroom of revelation. The screen above them had gone still. The logo of Reeves Holdings glowed like a verdict against the twilight sky. No more files. No more documents. Just truth. Hanging there. And that's when the real unraveling began. Not from Malcolm, but from everyone else. Tom stood off to the side, hands limp at his waist. His board badge, once clipped proudly to his belt, now felt like an admission of guilt. "I served on this whole board for 6 years," he muttered. 6. No one answered, because no one knew if he was speaking to the crowd or to himself. Linda from Unit 3C clutched her cardigan. Her lips moved, but her voice barely rose above a whisper. "All those mornings I waved at him like he was new, every time. And he'd just nod. Never corrected me. Never." She stopped herself. Didn't cry. Didn't need to. Guilt doesn't always fall with tears. Sometimes it just settles heavy in the chest. Immovable. On the third-floor balcony, a man named Marcus leaned on the railing. Veteran, ex-cop, had once filed a noise complaint against Malcolm for nothing more than walking late with headphones. He closed his eyes, because now he understood. The noise wasn't from Malcolm. It was from his own assumptions. Mrs. Lopez sat on the curb now, coffee long gone cold in her hands. "I should have known," she whispered, "the way he carried himself. The way his dog waited at corners without command. That's discipline. That's intention." Jasmine walked over, crouched beside her. "You knew, deep down." "No," Mrs. Lopez said, shaking her head. "I suspected, and I stayed quiet, and that silence was permission." Jasmine looked away, because she knew that feeling too. And then from behind the gate, the teenager's mom finally spoke. Her voice was low, clear. "I told my son not to post the video. Thought I was protecting him. But really," she looked down, "I was protecting myself. From the shame of admitting I still live in a world where I had to wonder if he belonged." Her son touched her elbow, gentle. "Mom, you raised me better than that." She didn't smile, didn't correct him, because in that moment, correction wasn't the point. Reflection was. Malcolm stood still. He hadn't moved since the sign changed. Not out of arrogance, but out of grace. He was giving them space not for apology, but for awakening. Tom finally turned toward him, tried to speak, stopped, then finally found the words. "We didn't just misjudge you." A pause. "We misjudge ourselves." Malcolm met his eyes, and this time, he nodded slowly. Not to forgive, not yet, but to acknowledge the truth, the real kind, the kind that comes not from words, but from recognition. And the crowd, they didn't cheer, didn't clap, they stood still, because justice had been served not with a gavel, but with a mirror, and each person was now looking at their own reflection, wondering, how many others had they overlooked? How many other Malcolms had they erased in silence? The shift didn't happen with a speech. It happened in the silence after, because transformation rarely begins with applause. It begins with a question, and this time, it came from Linda. She stepped toward Malcolm, careful, not performative, no excuses in her voice. Just one sentence. "What do we do now?" The crowd turned to her. Malcolm did too, not with judgment, but with curiosity, because that question, that was the first honest thing she'd said all morning. Jasmine spoke next. "We start with policies. We audit the board. We rotate leadership." Tom opened his mouth, but Malcolm held up a hand. "No defenses," he said. "This isn't about guilt. It's about growth." Steve, the security guard, took off his cap. "Sir, I know I failed. I followed the loudest voice. I didn't verify. If you'll allow it, I want retraining, and I want it public." Malcolm nodded once. "That's a start." Mr. Howard raised his cane slightly. "The neighborhood used to do monthly forums. Then we stopped. I say we bring them back. Not just for homeowners, for everyone who works, lives, and walks these blocks." Linda turned. "Malcolm, would you lead the first one?" A beat passed. Then he said, "No." Gasps, a pause. But he continued, "I won't lead it." He pointed to Jasmine. "She will." Jasmine blinked. "Me?" Malcolm nodded. "You saw. You spoke. You recorded. And you stood. That's leadership." The teenager raised his hand next. "Can I help too?" "You already are," Malcolm said. From that moment, suggestions flowed like a tide. A new diversity clause in board elections, live streaming HOA meetings, restorative justice panels for residents involved in incidents, Community walkthroughs with local high schoolers to learn who actually lives here. Even Tom, face pale but firm, offered his resignation publicly. I stepped on silence too many times, he said. Let someone else speak now. The screen above them displayed a new message. Change doesn't begin when power shifts. It begins when power listens. And below it, Greenview Rebuild Phase 1, a community that sees. Malcolm stepped forward, not center stage, just present, and said, you won't fix it in a day or a month. But if you're willing to look at yourselves the way you looked at me, you'll build something better than clean sidewalks and trimmed hedges. He pointed to the block. You'll build trust. Mrs. Lopez nodded. Then let's start sweeping. Jasmine laughed, literally or metaphorically. Mrs. Lopez smiled, both. From a place of tension, the courtyard had become a think tank, not of policies, of people, not of punishment, of purpose. Malcolm didn't take the mic, didn't pose for photos. He just backed away. One step, then two, until he was part of the circle, not the center. Because real leadership doesn't cling, it releases. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, the courtyard had changed. Not physically. The paint still clung to the Range Rover's trim. The gate still creaked when it opened. And the air still carried the warm concrete scent of Atlanta at dusk. But something deeper had shifted. The people. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was full. Of thought. Of understanding. Of presence. Malcolm stood beside his car alone now. But not isolated. He wore the same hoodie, same scuffed sneakers, no spotlight, no entourage, just him. He looked up once at the sign above the gate. His name was still there. But now, it wasn't a revelation. It was recognition. Jasmine approached quietly. You leaving? Malcolm nodded. Nothing more to say. She paused. They're gonna talk about this. They should, he replied. She hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you shut it down sooner? The yelling, the paint, the accusations. You could have stopped it in the first 5 minutes. Malcolm looked down the block, then answered, because sometimes truth needs witnesses. A pause. Not noise, just clarity. And the only way to teach clarity is to let the fog play itself out. Jasmine nodded. She understood. It wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about the lesson. And the lesson had landed. The teenager jogged up, phone still in hand. Sir, he said, panting a little, the video's at 1.3 million views. But I'm turning off comments. I don't want this to be about likes. Malcolm smiled, small, genuine. You just made the internet grow up a little. The boy grinned. My mom says you made us all grow up. Mrs. Lopez waved from her window above. A group of residents had started scrubbing the curb with water and towels, not because they were told, but because they wanted to. Malcolm opened his car door, paused, and then, for the first time all day, he said something loud enough for everyone to hear. I'm not leaving. Heads turned. I'm just going to lunch. A beat, same as I planned before the paint. Chuckles rose, light, real. He stepped in, started the engine. The Range Rover purred dignified, unstained by ego. And as he pulled away, the drone hovered overhead, capturing one final shot. The courtyard, people talking, cleaning, listening, becoming. Then a final message blinked onto the screen. You never know who's watching, but you always know who's watching back. And underneath, in smaller letters, dignity isn't loud. It just lasts longer.